Okay.
I will tell you all.
We have one or two divas in the profession.
Yeah, diva is a great word.
The mics don't work.
Are we going to speak very loud today?
We can speak without microphones. Oh, it works, yes? All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to ask you to take your seats. As you see in the program, this is the last discussion panel. And if I was one of the speakers, I would say that probably we reached the stage or the moment in the conference when everything has been said, but not said by me yet. But I'm not one of the speakers, so you are safe. I will not repeat everything I've heard yesterday and today. Let me start with introducing to you our distinguished speakers. And near to me is Madam Ketevan Tsikhanishvili, State Minister for Reconciliation and Civil Equality of Georgia. And next one is Mr. Frederick Foy. He works for Swedish Civil Contingencies Agency, and he has got a good experience, I believe, as one of the employees in NATO Stratcom Center of Excellence in Riga. I believe it will help us, it will help him to explain us more deeper and broader approach to the topics we want to cover today. And Jessica Aro, she works for Finnish National Broadcaster. And as I said, this is a final discussion panel, but not for all some of the speakers. Jessica will also make one training this afternoon, so it's good to have you here. When I received invitation to this event and I saw public diplomacy, the notion, the first reaction probably I've got that was the same like Mark Leahy yesterday told, that maybe it's a little bit outdated, but then I had a second thought. It's probably, yes, public diplomacy is a narrow idea. If you look to the strategic communications, it's the broader, but this is probably the softest tool from strategic communications. And it's not outdated. We can use real soft power, which was described by one of the main theoreticians of soft power, Joseph Nye, who explained us that public diplomacy is a tool to implement soft power which is based on attractiveness. And this is good. Yes, nowadays we can hear every day the words disinformation, misinformation, hybrid warfare, etc. And yes, we have to speak about all those problems, but still there is a place for good, normal public diplomacy to reach hearts and minds, to win hearts and minds of your audience you want to influence, without any manipulations, without lies. So, me as a researcher, I like definitions. And if we look to what organizers wanted to speak, that our speakers are speaking about. So the role of strategic communications and public diplomacy in addressing information gap, security implications in the ethnic minority regions, building resilience through education and media literacy in response to disinformation. And when I look to the word resilience, I really like definition, the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. And the other definition is the ability of the substance or object to spring back into shape. If we look to what your ministry does, Madam Minister, about which system we are speaking, which system or subject has to spring back, and what are the stresses to this system. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. First of all, I greet you all, of course, especially the guests who had visited Georgia, and once again, very warm welcome on behalf of the government. We are very glad to host this forum. Well, my ministry deals with quite uneasy tasks, and when we speak about the need for resilience, this is related to major challenge that the country has. And this challenge is a continued Russian occupation, the continued and unresolved conflicts that creates a lot of security and humanitarian burden on ground, also for people and thousands of people. So basically, if we want to relate it to this forum's topic and perhaps, you know, today's panel's topics on how to build the resilience, you know, dynamic and proactive peace policy that is aimed at reconciliation of the people on ground is one way to build the resilience against the strategy of divisions that Russia is undertaking. You have mentioned the terms and notions, and indeed, you know, in international discourse, we started to use just several years back these terms on hybrid threat or hybrid warfare that would include propaganda and misinformation to describe Russia's pretty old but modernized strategy of influence. However, in this part of the world and in this country, unfortunately, we have known it long before. And I don't go now to Soviet times necessarily, even though I would have all good reasons, because misinformation and propaganda were like a religion for the regime. But I go to 90s already, when propaganda basically shortly followed the military adventures of Russia, inspiring or staging the conflicts in the neighborhood to then keep these conflicts alive, and by that try to influence. And as time goes, of course, you know, these technologies become more sophisticated, and Russia invests impressively more in the propaganda, and it makes our task more difficult to counter that. However, necessary for Georgia and other countries concerned to preserve the freedom and basically democratic foundation. So what does the Russian policy do in that respect in Georgia? It's very difficult to propagate pro-Russian in this country. It's very difficult to generate pro-Russian sympathies overwhelmingly. It doesn't work. So basically, it attacks and undermines what is not for Russia, which doesn't mean it's against Russia, but what is not for Russia or about Russia. It is trying to undermine sovereignty of the country. It is trying to undermine the development course of the country and the European and Euro-Atlantic aspiration. Yesterday, the results of the survey have been published, which once again demonstrated that both EU and NATO membership have a solid and unwavering public support, respectively 75% and 65%. Whereas the same 65% identify Russian aggression as the major threat to Georgia and the neighborhood. So it's no surprise that Russia failed basically to promote this kind of alternative project, club of attraction in the name of Eurasian Union. It's not popular in Georgia. Overwhelming majority of Georgians don't support it because basically we know it since 300 years under different names. But it's not, you know, only about historic memories. Of course, you asked me in the beginning the question. My ministry deals with this continued occupation, and we have daily provocations. It's not just a static given. It's not a frozen state of a conflict. It's daily provocations, especially since 2008, be it around 100 military maneuvers in the territories of Abkhazia and Trin Valley region, South Ossetia, which now host very solid Russian military bases, but also, you know, capturing the locals, farmers and shepherds who are in their own orchards, close to the occupation line by the Russian soldiers, and it takes a very regular character. Human rights are grossly violated, especially for Georgians still living in modest numbers in these two regions, and the lives are not protected. On 22nd of February, that was another tragic day when a young citizen of Georgia, man Archil Tatunashvili, was captured in Trin Valley region, South Ossetia, basically beaten to death. killed over there, and his body was not handed over for 26 days, despite all the concerted efforts. We come to that case just slightly, you know, in a moment to illustrate the disinformation. But before, just to round up, so it's very difficult to propagate pro-Russian, and this goes true for the overall Georgia. The Russian-sponsored civil society organizations or political parties either are weak or unpopular. Also, this very traditional kind of Orthodox Christian kinship narrative doesn't work in the way Russia may want it to work, especially when Georgian public sees reports again on a regular basis how Russian soldiers capture the locals when they are lighting a candle in a church or going to the cemetery of the kings on the Christian holidays along the occupation line, and these are rock-solid facts, unfortunately so. The point is that this influence has its own geography. If it doesn't work that much overall in Georgia, of course we have the two other areas where the situation is slightly different. The occupied territories, where Russia feels free-handed in the absence of any international, basically, presence, and the regions of Georgia compactly settled by ethnic minorities for totally different reasons. And one of the main challenges that still remain for the state of Georgia, and I would say largely for society and for these people concerned, is still the lack of the knowledge of the state language, which makes them more exposed to foreign media, amongst them Russian media. So what happens in the occupied territories? You know, there are many different tools in combination. In the very own start, it was also about, you know, trying to create the so-called Ruski Mir. And by distributing illegal Russian passports, then trying to crusade and launch even the 2000 aggression with the pretext of protecting the citizens. But it didn't quite work, because particularly in Abkhazia, people don't necessarily identify themselves with Russia. The other tools are, of course, TV, media at large, but TV still remains overall in Georgia 72%, especially in the occupied territories, the major source of information. And the media is very much controlled, so they are exposed to exclusively Russian channels, all local channels. Some basically signals are blocked from here. Our transit to digital broadcasting somewhat also complicated the situation, but we tried to fill in the gap by distributing necessary set-top boxes, you know, apparatus in some areas of these territories for population to make it accessible. It is social media, and in social media, it's pretty easy to block out the forums which they completely don't like, but in the others to have a lot of anonymous users or trolls who would very much moderate the discussion. Last summer, there was a new factor that came in. There have been some anonymous users publishing I guess, hacked emails or hacked documents and photos of some of the Abkhaz civil society who would get funding from Western organizations or would get engaged themselves in dialogue projects for Georgia, tried to announce them as traitors and to start a witch hunting against them. This also not particularly worked, but you know, this is just to demonstrate how anti-Western, particularly anti-NATO myths are created. The image of enemy of Georgia and Georgians is preserved. The people are kept a hostage of conflict times and war times artificially. In Sputnik, for instance, quite recently they started a special column on both Sputnik Abkhazia and Sputnik Ossetia, which they have launched a little bit earlier, that every day basically reports stories and picture stories of conflicts. And of course, with a lot of disinformation, to always keep this wound alive and not to let the people, you know, come to the reconciliation, something that my ministry serves for. I promise to get back to the case of Archil Tatunashvili. It's most recent, most tragic. The whole society, of course, was very fairly outraged and sad. But what happened in this day is just an example. There was reports in Russian media as if Ossetians came out in the streets and they would protest and demand that the body of this diseased man would not be handed over to Georgians. And this is something that is, I think, for all humans, but especially in this region, it's something very sacred, and it's shared across the divides. The information was picked up widely. It, of course, generated a lot of tension. and it was not true, it was a total fake news, and Ossetians themselves, many of them wrote that, and even the analysis of the footage, video footage, showed that there was no such a demand. But it generated the tension, it escalated the division, and the bullet was out of the gun, and they have taken out this information, but the job was done, and this is how they do. Now, and by that they create those invisible barriers in terms of stereotypes, images of enemy, which are not easier, if not more difficult, than to overcome, let's say, 100 kilometers of visible and very solid barriers that we have to overcome. With minority regions, I already told you that the strategy and the situation is slightly different. The knowledge of Georgian language, a state language, is about 30%, quite optimistically assessing, and it's not a kind of a very solid knowledge yet. Whereas 60% of population claim that they know Russian. And I had some data here that in Armenian populated region, while many watch Armenian channels, like 60%, 40% still watch Russian channels. And in Azeri-populated Khmer-Mukatli region, where, by the way, also the knowledge of Russian is less than in the Armenian-populated region, they watch more Azeri channels, Turkish channels, but also Russian channels around 16 to 17%. Whereas Georgian channels are not so widely watched, and of course this is one of the challenges that we have to counter. So how to do that? And I'm concluding in a minute. Overall, of course, it's very clear strategy, preserve peace and develop unimpeded a democratic consolidation, and very steadfast movement to European and Euro-Atlantic integration is the only solid and sustainable way to counter that in longer term. Also, we're very proactive peace policy. We have all these barriers. I described the situation. But our formula is higher these barriers are, more efforts we have to take to overcome them, to bridge those divides that are getting larger and larger by purposeful Russian policies, hard and soft powers. Very recently, we have launched a new peace plan called A Step to Better Future. That is a very comprehensive proposal that we have been preparing for pretty long. And this is targeting to help people improve their lives on ground, those who are affected, and I mean Georgians and Abkhaz and Ossetians, because all suffer from this situation, to improve their social and economic and humanitarian situation, as well as by that initiative, create platforms for more dialogue, people-to-people contact, movement, cooperation along joint interests, and ultimately confidence building and reconciliation. It's about trade across dividing lines, it's about education internally and externally, and it's about easing the access to different services and benefits, including those generated by, for instance, our EU integration agenda, such as visa-free or DCFTA. It's very difficult to reject those proposals because they are also tailored in a status-neutral manner, aimed to avoid the issues of status where possible, to make humanitarian solutions kind of flowing. The only response that we had from de facto political circles, it was again referring to status. First recognize and then we can talk, which is a no-go, of course they know about it. Generally in social media, and it gives me a hope that it does have a very, very solid potential in future, the reactions have been quite rational, up to the point, of course, because this is also very difficult terrain, and it enjoys a very wide international support. This is just to demonstrate. Of course, it's not enough. We have to think together, and I very much appreciate, us getting together, think forward how we can also improve communication per se and communication strategy using via different tools. One and very effective way is to sponsor more, invest more in people-to-people contacts and confidence-building projects. Today, there are many conflicts around the world. Unfortunately, this is the very sad competition for also resources on where to go. And we have to absolutely prove that this is important, not only for the security of the country, but for European security. And it will pay off if we invest more into people-to-people contacts. These are small societies, and nothing works better than a handshake. it does really ruin the stereotypes that are being built by this propaganda for years within 2 hours when these people get together. So this is extremely effective. With minority regions, of course, we have long-term and short-term solutions. We do a lot in terms of helping at the moment to communicate the information through different means, including awareness building. NATO and EU Information Center set it as one of its priorities, and the NATO week actually opened in Azeri-populated Kvemokartli as a symbolic gesture that we want to explain, go out and, you know, on a very down-to-earth language, explain what does it mean and how they can benefit. Longer term, it's about education. It's about improving this knowledge of state language, of course. We do a lot now in schools. We have a very good program at the universities called 1+4, when the students who have never possessed the command of the state language Georgian get to the high education institutions, universities, with 1 exam only versus 4 in normal case. And they study for 1 year the language, and they, without the exam, continue to study at the universities. In 2011, we had 247 students. Now, last year, we had 1,047 students. It's a great and very popular program. Now my task is to have these young professionals who have ethnic minority background, command of both languages, native and state language, pave their way and make their careers. We just also launched last year a special internship program for these people in the state apparatus, in different state structures. We did it pilot phase, by the way, through the support of the USAID, but in December we have institutionalized it, and twice a year now the successful students will have open doors in more than 20 state structures to make their first step into professional career. Media is private, while public broadcaster does have some novelties and more plans. The novelties are that the Georgian news are transliterated in live in the dubbing of Azeri and Armenian languages, and they have a web portal also in 7 different languages. There are some private media, like for instance Talk TV in Russian, that was started in February this year, which grew very fast and covers the Samskhe-Javakheti Armenian populated area. So we cannot directly intervene into private media, of course, but we sponsor some newspapers, and we definitely need more help and cooperation. My last sentence, if we want to be really, really successful, I think we, from our side, as Georgia, have to do a lot to do our, let's say, homework on our chosen way of reforms towards European Union and NATO integration. And I only hope that this road would be tangibly rewarding, because this is, again, you know, one of the guarantees that manifested success on a chosen development way, which is different from what Russia tries to create, is something that would attract even those who are under the influence of Russian propaganda today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I have already one question for you, but I will left it to the questions and answers session just to save time. You mentioned the Russian world. I remember when we started to our research job in our think tank in Latvia 2006, then the Russian world idea was really soft power idea. That was really based on the Joseph Sny's approach, that let's use attractiveness of the culture to win hearts and minds in other countries. But something happened, something really serious. I remember this speech of Vladimir Putin in 2014 on the 18th of March, just after illegal annexation of Crimea. And during his speech, he used the idea of Russian world as a legitimate factor or reason why they occupied Crimea. He said that something like that, that people in Germany will understand it because they remember the reunion of the country on the end of the Cold War, and the reunion of Crimea, unity of Crimea and Russia is not just reunion of Russian historical lands, but reunion of Russian world. Wow, that means he used this Russian world idea to explain why they are occupied territory of neighboring country. So this is corrupt already. This is not, they cannot use it like really soft power idea. So I'd like to switch to the Frederick Foy. So when I asked you what are you willing to say before this session, you explained me so many topics. I just thought it's not realistic to explain it in 10 minutes, but you can try, please.
Thank you so much. I'm very honored to be here in Georgia. I've been working with influence activities for several years now, and before that with Russia in different capacities. And it's so valuable for me to get a greater understanding of how influence activities work in different regions. And I'm going to speak about resilience, and cooperation is one of the key factors to resilience. So just to very briefly show you how we in Sweden view influence campaigns, influence activities, hybrid activities, all these definitions we struggle with and that are keeping academia paid for decades to come. At the Swedish Civil Contingencies Agency, we deal with cognitive and physical threats. Diplomatic, economic, and military, that's the domain of the respective departments and agencies, and the armed forces. Influence campaigns can threaten Sweden's sovereignty, our population, our functionality of our society, fundamental values, and other Swedish interests. Resilience is a key to countering hybrid threats. The next sentence, knowing your capabilities, may seem like something that should be completely obvious. Yet, despite many years working in this field, it is not. The comprehensive approach that, for example, Russia engages in when it comes to hybrid or influence activities is still viewed by many of the observers as something that can be seen through either the lenses of security policy, foreign policy, or military issues. That's not the case. Is this actually something that should be viewed as a criminal pursuit? What about the financial issues? Many other ways you can view influence activities. Should we also use our capabilities? They should also include such things perhaps as, culture. Why is it awesome to be Swedish? Why is it awesome to be Georgian? What kind of public-private options do we have for countering influence activities? Knowing your vulnerabilities is also very important. Unfortunately, far too many individuals and groups who work in this field think of vulnerabilities as weaknesses. Frankly, not knowing your vulnerabilities is a weakness. To meet a comprehensive approach, we need to know our vulnerabilities so that we do not run after every single Russian shtick, where we will rapidly be overwhelmed. When we see a new Russian narrative or some activity, is it actually relevant for us? That should be our first question. Much of it is not. They actually do not know their own target audience analysis at times. So dare to be self-critical. Resilience is subjective depending on what region you actually happen to be working and living in. I would like to say that resilience is a sum of education. And in Sweden, we have trained just below 10,000 civil servants and other officials in awareness of influence activities. And these training sessions range from a couple of hours to an entire week or more. We also have training programs in the public education. We use the Department of Education uses popular comics. We also, Swedish media engages in media literacy training, and through various sources for debunking, etc. Persistence. Now, in our media climate, we have a very, very rapid flow of information. When it comes to the Kremlin's influence activities in particular, they are repetitive and drawn out, as most of you definitely know. We need to be able to motivate and justify for our decision makers that this is a long, drawn-out process. I have far too often encountered decision makers asking me, do we have a quick fix? Isn't there some form of computer system that can actually help us identify and warn against influence activities? No. This is a human-based activity to provide resilience, to identify and understand influence activities. Legislation. Going back to what I said previously, what kind of action, we need to think of legislation in terms of what kind of corporate structures are allowed around the world. What kind of legal framework for investing money offshore. We need to understand that to a greater degree. This is a very complex world, and many of us have backgrounds that are not from the financial sector. Then, of course, legislation cannot interfere with free speech and free press, which are core values of Swedish society. Robustness. Robustness of society leads to confidence. Robustness leads to both our society and our population being able to resist influence activities to a much, much greater degree. Media consumers in today's media landscape, they may be lazy or they may be thrill seekers just looking for a clickbait, but they do also not want to be duped. So I am not always pessimistic regarding the effects of echo chambers and such, but we need to find effective communicators. I'm saving cooperation for last, since the kind of communicator that is required is definitely not always a middle-aged white civil servant who happens to have expert knowledge in a field. We need to find communicators that will correspond to our rapidly evolving, very diverse societies. Finally, cooperation, domestic and international, with a comprehensive approach for conducting influence activities, we need to be able to communicate within our societies so that we can find the best resources available to engage in influence activities, against influence activities, of course. We also, international cooperation is also of incredible value to understand not how influence activities affect societies. And this is not only regional cooperation. We need to find like-minded nations around the globe. We have influence activities that can be traced to either the Kremlin directly or to Russian groups, ranging from the Philippines to Malaysia. And in this case, we're going from the Philippines and east, not the other way around. So I will conclude my presentation. I actually managed to squeeze it in 10 minutes. And thank you so much for your attention. I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you, Frederick. Just to save our time, I'd like to directly give opportunity to Jessica to say what she wants to say. Trolls have been mentioned by Minister. I think you have to continue with this. Please.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the honor of inviting me here, and thank you for your excellent speeches. information warfare, Russia, and extremism. And at the moment, I'm writing a book about Russian information warfare. But I will show you how complex and hybrid in nature this information society and environment is at the moment, against which we have to build the resilience to. So I will tell you what I have found out in my investigations, which I started already in 2014, and then what can be done about it, and what has been done about it already. So in 2014, I found out the very existence of the St. Petersburg troll factory. I wanted to find out immediately, how do they influence actual Finnish people, like everyday Finnish people who hang around on internet and maybe read their messages. I saw it then as a threat to freedom of speech and free flow of information, but I really quickly turned to see the whole troll phenomenon as also a threat to democracies and to our national security. So I will go through how I did my investigation. I asked Finnish people's help. I asked them in a public article. I identified the troll issue and I told how they operate, how they are known to work online, in which forums, and I asked Finnish people to tell. Have they seen such operations on social media? Have trolls attacked them personally? And if yes, have they had any influence, any impact on random Finns? So I started to gather a lot of information. I was hinted and told stories by 200 different members of the audience who had witnessed the troll operations. And I also interviewed a massive amount of moderators of traditional media sites, because trolls also attack traditional media's comment sections. I also, for example, interviewed the moderator of the biggest Russian-speaking forum in Finland. I didn't just make investigation on how Finnish language trolling and social media disinformation is happening. I also looked into Russian language and also English language disinformation in the Finnish environment. So I found out that, for example, in this Russian-speaking forum, the trolls were aggressively spreading violent theories, spreading chaos, attacking more normal participants of the conversations, and later on they even had to shut down parts of the Russian-speaking comment section because the whole section was totally terrorized. But what I then found out, this is really everything in a nutshell, in a really short form. I found out that it had influence in Finnish people and so in the Finnish society as a whole. Many Finns told me that they had stopped discussing Russia issues online or Russia's policies or criticizing Russia's policies online because they had become targets of different kinds of troll attacks. So they didn't want to hear any, death threats or any kinds of name calling as Russophobe or CIA troll or whatever after voicing out their opinions. So they preferred ending participation in the discussions. Also, some Finns became unsure what is true and what is not true. For example, they mentioned that time relevant Ukrainian crisis and war, which was common narrative of the troll texts and troll memes and troll videos. The Finns told me that they don't know anymore what is happening in Ukraine because there was also a lack of a proper information from Ukraine from time to time. So people went online to look for more information to find troll texts and Russian propaganda. Then, in my personal opinion, the most worrying result was that some Finns also turned into propagandists themselves after they were exposed to Russian propaganda. So they started to share these Russian fake news and fake troll narratives and memes and YouTube videos further in their own social media networks. Obviously, there was also the result that some people had noticed this phenomenon, but it had no impact in their behavior or in their activities. Then here are just some examples of the troll texts that were being shared all over the place. It was always about fascists in Ukraine who were guilty of the crisis and the war. Also, Russia was always whitewashed to be not in any way attached to the crisis and the war, and just general bad-mouthing and mocking of Western leaders and Western countries, framing them as Nazis and stuff. Here also some of the materials that was sent to me. Here the Finnish state symbol is being smeared with some Nazi symbols, and it says Finnish fascism, and there are two persons who kind of look like they might be Finns. So I realized that such material already exists, or it can be manufactured super quickly and spread through internet, even internationally, to promote the idea of Finland or any other country or any person as some kind of Nazi. And I also realized that this labeling and using harsh language of Western leaders and countries is a form of propaganda and information warfare. It is used to dehumanize the target and to mold the public opinion towards the idea that it's justified to attack these horrible Nazis, either in Ukraine or in Finland or wherever. Here are also one very well-used technique. So the troll activists and professional propagandists, of whom some work for Russian entities who are still Finnish citizens, but they also operate internationally, they produce social media storms in which they lure people on social media to participate in criminal complaints campaigns against journalists, against media houses, against researchers of Russia, against officers, and nowadays we're just seeing at the moment criminal complaints campaigns against Finnish police, who is trying to tame pro-Kremlin extremists in Finland. So this is only one method. Then here is one other method. Email lists are very well used by the troll activists. They gather different kinds of lists, including, for example, emails of president or politicians or civil servants or bosses of the media. And through these email lists, they send tailored disinformation messages. For example, spreading Russian messages or smearing their workers or such, or spreading conspiracy theories such as some journalists or researchers are a threat to Finnish national security and should be investigated. This is also a very famous technique of Russian information warfare. They always try to marginalize their target when it's an individual, and to marginalize him or her away from the public debate, and to make him or her look like some kind of conspiracy theorist or crazy person, and marginalize him or her also in the professional community. Here are some examples of trolling group contents, which were and still are administered by professional propagandists and fake social media profiles. So the trolls put up these groups in which they start inviting people, random people, Finnish people, inviting them to their sphere of influence and starting to propagate them with Russian media fake news, Finnish blogosphere fake news, and then comments that are just so criminal. Or if they were taken to the court, they could be convicted. And they justify all this by a normal use of freedom of speech, even though it's not normal use of freedom of speech to, for example, make hate speech against minorities or such. Here also what they did 2015, after me and my colleague and a really great Russian fixer had been investigating the Russian troll factory in St. Petersburg and dug out all information we could get and also produce articles about it in English. So then the troll activists, they staged a protest against Wiley. They were calling it Wiley Troll Factory. And they didn't manage to get much people there, but what I found out already then was that they used Facebook again successfully in inviting people to the streets. So what happens in the information space, in the cyberspace, or in the troll sphere, if you like, doesn't stay there. It does have consequences, and it does cause hateful activities in the real world. Last year, when US officials were very heavily investigating the Russian meddling in the US presidential elections, they actually found out that the Russian troll factory had staged 2 protests in one street in America, and these protesters were attacking each other. Other part of the protest was anti-Muslim, anti-immigrant, and the other was pro-immigrant, pro-Muslim. So here, who is doing the trolling? This is the Embassy of Russia in Helsinki. Their social media activism was specifically in 2014-2015 very trolling, not diplomatic at all. Here, what the programming fake media is doing, and this is what I have to say, that this is so brilliant, the use of proxies. They seemingly put out Finnish sources of information, but they actually go and get training from Eastern Ukraine, from people who are connected to Russian security services, and then they attack police. And they stage protests, violent ones, and here how to counter this. As this sphere is so complex, there needs to be so much legislation changes to be done, and many of those have been already done by the EU and by some nation states, but one thing that is super important is to push the social media giants, just like Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, which is super good at agitating hatred and building hate communities and propaganda communities, to follow national legislation. And yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica, indeed, for your presentation. And before I'll give floor to the really short question and answer session, because we are running out of the time, I'd like to ask you one question, because we notice in Latvia that those who are working in the field of exposure of Russian disinformation propaganda, they being attacked by trolls. Did it affect you some way?
Yes, it really heavily affected me. So already in 2014, I became a target of a heavyweight smearing campaign originating from Russian disinformation fake news sites, and from there spreading to Finnish fake news sites. And it's a massive case investigated by the police, and including crimes that look like really organized international criminality. And yeah, if you look the Finnish Google about me, it's totally trashed, totally. And in the Wikipedia article, it also says that I have been convicted of many drug crimes, for example.
Okay. So I just remember one of the results of the studies of NATO Stratcom Center of Excellence in Latvia, and they found out that approximately 70% of those anti-NATO messages being spread through Twitter are spread by bots. So if you want to make some, if you want to argue with some who is spreading out anti-NATO messages in Twitter, be aware that maybe this is not real human being, just a robot. So we can have first round of questions and comments maybe. So and in the process you are thinking, I have a question to Madam Minister. Reconciliation means there are two parts who are ready to be involved in this process. Do you see that in the societies of occupied territories, I mean, common people, average people, are they ready to be part of this reconciliation process?
Thank you for this question. You know, all what we spoke now in the introduction was how these divides are artificially upheld. Of course, there are some factors that unfortunately divide the society on ground. And this is a very sad experience of conflict and the pain that goes through for, all involved and all the sides involved. And back then we have not been smart enough not to avoid the provocations many times, you know, on ground, not to engage into these conflicts, which is against all of us. Years of alienation. There is a generation now for 25 years particularly who has never interacted with live Georgians because Georgians are exiled. And some people in Abkhazia, especially because, you know, South Ossetia and Exodus happened in 2008, are just having this image and stereotype what they were taught at school. And trust me, this is not good stuff, or what they hear in media. So there is a lot that divides. It's not an easy task, but I will tell you some facts. In the last couple of years, and those are like last 3, especially 2 years or so, these contacts, people-to-people contacts and movement is on quite a rise. For instance, in the last 4 years, 6 times more many Abkhaz and Ossetians came to the rest of Georgia only for one program, which is a healthcare program. And this program, when it started, was so much attacked and, you know, so much somehow, you know, made internally something that people, 10 first users of this program, had actually to never return to the region anymore, because they were hunted by the prosecution. Now there are thousands. The Russians have closed 4 crossing points out of 6 because this movement was really going very well, including trade, including, you know, mixed families, because for instance, prior to conflict in Abkhazia, we had 1/3 of all families mixed, Georgian and Abkhaz. The same goes in Ossetia. There was a very high rate of intermarriage, which of course, you know, then generate some cultural proximity, kinship, you know, very natural ties, which were cut, unfortunately. But they closed these so-called crossing points. However, still, with the only functioning one in each direction, we have more people visiting back and forth now than ever before. And there are many more willing to engage themselves into some activities. We follow this social media as well. People, you know, they want to have peace everywhere. They want to develop. They have to have some prospects for future, which is now taken away totally, because these regions look like a ghetto surrounded by barbed wires and an extended military base when it comes to South Ossetia. There is 80% of depopulation. You know, it's 20,000 people now living in South Ossetia, and there are thousands of Russian soldiers on top of it. What I mentioned, it was 140, I think, in both military drills and maneuvers per year for these regions. Imagine, look at the map. It's a small territory. Now, what it means for people, it means like every second day they hear something, and there are, you know, so these military trainings and polygons, no education, no money, nothing. Of course they want it. And people do this decently. There are many things, as I say, that divide us, but there are many more that unite us. And I hope that if we are persistent, if Russians don't succeed in their strategy to stop this, they work to stop it because they see it's effective, then I'm sure it will be successful.
Thank you so much. Do we have some questions or comments? Yes, please. Please introduce yourself.
I'm Nodar Angeshwili from Resource Management Institute. My question goes to Jessica thank you for the excellent presentation. One of your recommendations on the last slide is about encouraging journalists to cover the topic, and I assume you also meant investigate what you have done yourself, the Russian trolls. We have quite a similar situation in Georgia when we see these Facebook pages, anti-Western disinformation websites, which are like somehow camouflaged in Georgian sentiments, let's say, not saying they're Russian or pro-Russian. How can we, how can the journalists, how can civic activists uncover what exactly to uncover? What is easier to uncover, especially when it comes to trolls in the Facebook? Is it funding? Is it the coordination between different, let's say, the platforms? or something else? Maybe there's something you can share with us. Thank you.
Of course, thank you for the question. First, one thing that social media is so great about, you can actually with that investigate the chains of influence, because these people, they're not the brightest ones, not all of them, and they just do everything publicly, so it's quite easy to investigate them. But then you can do just like the super brave Russian journalists who originally uncovered the troll factory in St. Petersburg. They went to work there undercover as if they were just ordinary workers. But when they quit, they made excellent stories. So you can also penetrate those hate groups as long as Facebook is not denying the use of fake profiles. You can go and penetrate and try and get there. And then, of course, you need to have the attitude and the support from your employer. So if you end up in trouble, then you need to be supported by your employer, because the trouble might be very deep. But yeah, the problem is that some people are already afraid. For example, some journalists, they say they don't want to even cover Russia topics, even with a long stick. So that's a problem.
Okay, thank you. Frederick, I took from your presentation that resilience is not something you can switch on like in one moment, in 1 second. This is some like process we have to work. My question is about internet field in Sweden, about debunking teams. Do you have some debunking teams who are working with fake news, which is quite popular right now in Latvia as well? We know Ukrainians did a really good job in this field, but also other nations. So what about Sweden?
Well, we have several debunking options. There's something called the viral debunker in Swedish, crappy translation, but and they are established, they are popular, they have been well received for quite some time. This fall, we're having elections, and although Sweden is a difficult target for the Kremlin's influence activities, there's lingual differences, there's cultural differences, there's less than 20,000 Russians living in Sweden, etc., etc., etc. Yet we see concerted efforts by groups originating in Russia, at least, to spread false information regarding, for example, immigration, which is a topic we'll find all over Europe. That's being utilized by the Kremlin. That we are decadent and depraved, and all the bad things that you might see in the Russian view on Europe. We ascertain that it may be in the Kremlin's interest to see the Swedish elections fail, since then they can point out, look what that supposedly ideal Western democracy, look how they screwed up. So the 5 major newspapers, to go back to the exact question, or news sources, have gathered together just for the election, and they provide a debunking site where the news agencies, they provide their own interpretation and fact-checking. They do not fact-check together. It's not a machine to create the correct thought pattern here. However, 3 weeks before this website was launched, some other individuals made a spoof website. The real debunking website is known as Factist, which means really, Factist.nu. Somebody made a Factist.com, which has pretty much the same layout, and they serve pro-Kremlin versions of news pieces that may be pertinent for the Swedish elections.
Thank you so much. Probably we have to finish in this moment, and before I'll give opportunity for closing remarks, I'd like to say for myself, like from Latvian citizen, that many of Latvians feel solidarity with Georgia. So, and we hope that you will be one day member of NATO, and will be, because I believe you belong in that company, in that club. We were lucky to jump in 2004. So good luck with this, and thank you to all participants and to our speakers. Let's give them a warm applause. Thank you.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, let me take your attention for the final couple of minutes before we close down our Public Diplomacy Forum. For those of you who do not know me, I'm Nina Bolkvadze, Director of the Information Center NATO and EU, which operates under the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And I take this opportunity as one of the organizers of this Public Diplomacy Forum to thank, first of all, the staff, the very dedicated staff of the Information Center, Irina, Katie, and all my staff who have been really working day and night to make this happen. I'm sorry, Jessica. And I also want to thank the staff of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for their support, and the Foreign Minister himself, who has been very instrumental in strongly supporting to make this forum happen. And also, of course, without our partners and co-organizers such as NATO Liaison Office and NATO's Public Diplomacy Division and the Bulgarian Embassy and Ambassador herself, we would not be able to gather today. So thank you very much for your partnership, for your continuous partnership, because it has been the third year that Georgia is hosting NATO-Georgia Public Diplomacy Forum, and it's a great honor for us, for Georgia, to express our partnership and our standing with NATO countries on the value-based partnership that we have, and to express this cooperation in this format as well. So we have been hearing a lot of Russia during the last couple of days, and we have heard a lot about propaganda and fake news and the threats emanating from Russia with the information influences. And it shows once again that this is the problem that bothers equally politicians and high-ranking NATO officials, as well as experts and civil society representatives, journalists, and all of us, the parts of society, because this is the threat that tries to change the reality around us and change it in a way which will be detrimental to us. So this is the problem that really unites us, and I believe that united we will be able to seek the solutions and seek the ways out of it and how to overcome this threat. So I would like to thank you participants and the audience who have been engaged in these 2 days and asking questions, and I'm really hopeful that you will take back some good thoughts and good ideas from the shared experience from our international experts. And before we break up, I would like to make some technical remarks also. The lunch time has been changed. It will be at 12:30 in Fellini restaurant here in Radisson. And also another technical point, if you would like to take some notes from the presentations that we have seen here for the last 2 days, it will be available on the Information Center's website, infocenter.gov.gr. So thank you very much once again for your attention and for your active participation. Thank you.